The Ledger of Shadows. Augustine Darrow had been cataloging the city's slave registries for 3 months when something in a dusty archive made his hands tremble. The municipal courthouse was quiet that morning. Sunlight streaking through narrow windows, dust motes dancing lazily in the air. He had handled thousands of old documents, ledgers, and faded parchments in his career. But this ledger, handed to him reluctantly by the clerk, was different. "Be careful with that one," the clerk whispered, her voice low, almost reverent. "It's delicate." Augustine nodded, though curiosity sparked like wildfire in his chest. He pried the cover open. Faded leather, brittle pages, and ink that had dimmed over almost a century stared back at him. At first glance, it appeared to be an ordinary slave registry, but the entries quickly revealed otherwise. Rows of names, birth dates, parentage, and something else. Beside certain children's names were cryptic notes in perfect, minute handwriting. "Observe. Special record." He blinked. His fingers traced the delicate ink. Twin entries stood out immediately. A woman named Celeste had given birth to twins, Elias and Isolde, on July 14, 1842. Beside their names, a small symbol, a star enclosed in a circle, was drawn with painstaking care. The ledger contained nothing like this anywhere else. Darrow's pulse quickened. He had seen patterns in records before, but never like this. The annotations weren't casual, they were meticulous. Deliberate, almost ritualistic. He leaned closer, eyes scanning further. Entries noted. Compliant. Others. Resistant. And occasionally, brief remarks about temperament or physical attributes. This was not a simple registry. Someone had been tracking families, children, and traits with a precision that felt unnatural. A sudden creak in the hallway made Augustine start. He looked up. The clerk had disappeared. He thought he saw movement in the shadows, but when he glanced again, the corridor was empty. A cold shiver ran down his spine. Whoever had touched this ledger before clearly considered it dangerous, and now, for reasons he didn't yet understand, it was in his hands. He turned another page. There, hidden among ordinary names, were sketches of buildings, streets, and symbols he didn't recognize. Numbers and dates accompanied them, almost like instructions, but he couldn't decipher their meaning yet. The ledger seemed to whisper secrets, and Augustine, though cautious by nature, felt an irresistible pull toward discovery. Hours passed unnoticed as he traced patterns, copied notes, referenced with maps of the city. The more he read, the more he understood. The city's elite had not merely documented enslaved families. They had conducted something systematic, hidden in plain sight. Some children's futures were annotated, seemingly determined before they even left the cradle. The thought was chilling. Could a ledger, ink on paper, control destinies? Augustine rubbed his temples. The logical part of him resisted, but another, darker part couldn't ignore the patterns. The evidence was there, staring at him. As dusk approached, Augustine carefully closed the ledger. The courthouse emptied quickly. He walked past silent halls, each step echoing like a drum beat in his ears. The city outside felt ordinary, almost innocent. Yet he knew it wasn't. The ledger had revealed a shadow beneath the surface. A hidden current in the city's history that few knew existed. Back in his small apartment that evening, he spread the ledger on his desk. He had already begun tracing the descendants of Elias and Isolde, but the deeper he went, the more dangerous it seemed. He didn't yet know who had marked them, special, or why. But he suspected that the answer would unsettle anyone who dared to look. His thoughts were interrupted by a faint noise outside, footsteps in the hall, light and measured. Augustine froze. He lived alone. No one should have been there. He leaned forward, heart pounding. But when he looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. A draft from the window made the curtains sway. He laughed softly to himself, trying to shake the rising sense of paranoia. Still, the feeling lingered. The ledger wasn't just paper, it was a trap, a lure, a message from the past. Someone, or something, wanted it found. But not in the hands of just anyone. Augustine had crossed a line the moment he opened it. As he prepared to study it further, he whispered under his breath, "What were you trying to hide?" Outside, the city slept, unaware of the secrets buried in its very foundations. But in the shadows, the ledger's silent history waited to be revealed. And Augustine knew he had just begun a journey that would change everything he thought. He knew about the city and himself. Augustine discovers the mysterious ledger, notices cryptic symbols and annotations, realizes the city's elite tracked certain families systematically, ends with suspense. Someone may be watching, and Augustine is drawn into a dangerous secret. Tracing the shadows. The morning sunlight did little to ease Augustine Darrow's tension. The ledger sat open on his desk. Every page a whisper of secrets too dangerous to ignore. He had spent the night cross, referencing names, Qing family trees, and mapping addresses from the 1840s. Patterns were emerging, strange, unsettling patterns that didn't belong in ordinary history books. Elias and Isolde, the twins marked as special, became his focus. Augustine traced the names forward, generation by generation, using every public record he could find. Birth certificates, census records, old newspapers, anything that mentioned the families in the ledger. The results were perplexing. Some lines had disappeared entirely. Families who should have thrived seemed to vanish without explanation. Their descendants lost to time or moved far away. Others had prospered unusually, achieving wealth, influence, or education far beyond expectation. It was as though someone or something had manipulated their fates. Augustine's pulse quickened. The ledger had been more than a record. It had been a guide, a plan. Someone had been tracking traits, marking potential, perhaps even deciding destinies, decades before the children had grown. He decided to visit the oldest neighborhoods, following clues that the ledger suggested. The streets were quiet, lined with old brick houses that had survived centuries. Augustine knocked on doors, introduced himself as a historian researching family histories. Most people were polite but wary, giving vague answers or claiming ignorance. But a few spoke in hushed tones, their eyes flickering with memories they didn't quite trust themselves to voice. One elderly woman, hands trembling over a faded photograph, mentioned the twins with a sharp intake of breath. She didn't know their full story, only fragments, rumors passed down, whispered warnings that the family had been watched, chosen for reasons no one understood. As Augustine jotted notes, he sensed a shift. Shadows seemed thicker here, streets quieter than they should be, as if the city itself was holding its breath. His instinct warned him that someone, somewhere, was watching. Tracing his steps back at his apartment, he compared his notes with the ledger. Patterns began to coalesce. Families connected not just by blood, but by proximity, trades, and even political influence. The city's elite, it seemed, had maintained control through these families, subtly steering them, promoting some, suppressing others. Augustine felt a chill. The ledger wasn't just about tracking, it was about power. He noticed a strange pattern among the special children. Many had disappeared from public records for years at a time, only to reappear under different names or in distant locations. Augustine theorized that certain individuals were being deliberately hidden, perhaps even moved, as part of the city's secret plan. A sudden knock at his apartment door made him jump. He froze, heart pounding. No one was supposed to know about his work yet. He looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. The noise had come from outside, but no one remained. He stepped cautiously to the door, but no one was there. Only the faint echo of his own heartbeat in the silent corridor. Augustine couldn't shake the feeling that the ledger was not just a document, it was a warning. The city had watched these families for generations. Now, someone was watching him, determined to continue. He returned to the courthouse archives the next day, digging into more ledgers and letters referenced a special project. Others mentioned locations in the city with vague instructions. The cryptic symbols from the first ledger began to make faint sense. Maps, meeting points, coded dates. Someone had built a network over decades, hiding in plain sight. The ledger's twins, Elias and Isolde, were central. Every lead seemed to converge on them. Augustine speculated that if he could trace their descendants, he might unlock the full story. But with each discovery came the creeping realization. The ledger's knowledge came with danger. Those who had tried to uncover the truth before might not have lived to share it. By the week's end, Augustine had mapped several family branches, noting discrepancies, mysterious disappearances, and sudden bursts of wealth. One name kept recurring in the ledger's annotations: the Watcher. Special. Child had been marked with a subtle symbol linked to this mysterious figure. Augustine had no idea who or what it was, but the repeated references suggested influence, perhaps authority, over the fates of these families. Late one evening, he reviewed his notes and realized something alarming. The ledger had not only recorded history, it had predicted it. Patterns he hadn't noticed before emerged clearly. Certain families' movements, their success, and their failures, all traced by centuries. Old handwriting. Augustine shivered. Whoever had created this ledger had power. Augustine's very act of uncovering it might have made him part of the record now. He closed the ledger and leaned back in his chair, exhaustion weighing on him. The room felt suddenly smaller, oppressive. The shadows from the corners seemed to creep closer, and every passing car outside sounded like a warning. He knew he was being drawn deeper into a dangerous history, one that the city had worked to bury, and yet he couldn't stop. The ledger's secrets called to him, whispering of truth, injustice, and something much darker than simple record keeping. Augustine understood that the next step would take him out of archives and into the city itself, following trails that generations of families had left behind, but he had no idea how dangerous that path would be. The ledger had chosen him, and now Augustine Darrow had to follow its shadows, no matter what awaited him at the end. Augustine begins tracing the families in the ledger, notices patterns of disappearances, unusual success, and secret monitoring, realizes the ledger is part of a larger system of control and power. Introduces the first signs of danger. Someone is watching Augustine. Ends with a strong suspense hook. The next step will be dangerous, leading into part 3. Hidden codes. Augustine Darrow's apartment was a chaos of papers, maps, and faded photographs. The ledger lay open on his desk, its cryptic symbols and strange annotations demanding attention. Each night, the quiet hum of the city outside seemed to pulse in rhythm with his racing thoughts. He had traced families, uncovered patterns of disappearance and success, but the ledger still held more secrets. Symbols he had once ignored now seemed like a language waiting to be deciphered. He leaned closer, tracing one particularly intricate symbol, a circle with intersecting lines, surrounded by small dots and numbers. At first, it appeared abstract, but as he studied, he noticed recurring patterns. Certain symbols repeated next to specific families, always accompanied by dates or coded initials. The realization struck him like lightning. These were not merely decorations or arbitrary notes. They were instructions. Augustine's fingers trembled as he began mapping the symbols against the city's streets. Streets, alleys, old buildings, and forgotten landmarks aligned with the marks. Each special child from the ledger seemed tied to specific locations, as though their lives had been orchestrated to follow a carefully designed path. A faint chill ran down his spine. Someone had been planning generations of human lives with precision. And if these symbols were maps, Augustine was holding a citywide blueprint of power. He spent days cross-referencing city records, old maps, and family trees. Slowly, the patterns emerged. Certain buildings had served as meeting points, observation posts, or temporary homes for special families. Locations were now private residences. Others were abandoned, hiding clues no one had noticed for decades. One night, as rain pounded against his window, Augustine noticed something he hadn't before. The ledger's pages contained hidden dates that aligned with astronomical events, lunar cycles, eclipses, solstices. Each special child seemed to have been born or moved in relation to these events. The implications were unsettling. This was not random surveillance. It was an experiment guided by patterns, timing, and meticulous observation. He traced a symbol connected to Elias and Isolde. It pointed to a dilapidated building near the old docks. The ledger noted, Observe growth, maintain distance. Augustine felt a surge of adrenaline. If the ledger was correct, there was a location in the city where secrets had been hidden for over a century, and the twins' legacy was intertwined with it. But the more he uncovered, the more dangerous it felt. Each discovery seemed to cast a shadow behind him, a sensation he had first felt while tracing families. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. Streetlights flickered when he passed. Shadow moved in the corner of his vision, and he occasionally found small objects in his apartment moved slightly, as if someone had been there. Despite the fear, Augustine pressed on. He began decoding the symbols, noting that certain dots and lines represented family traits: intelligence, resilience, compliance. Each mark correlated with outcomes observed in descendants decades later. The ledger wasn't merely a record. It was predictive, almost prophetic. One evening, a letter slipped under his apartment door changed everything. Written in elegant but hurried handwriting, it read, "Stop digging. Some truths are not meant for the living. The ledger chooses who will see. You should not have opened it." Augustine felt a cold weight settle over him. Someone knew he had the ledger, knew he was decoding it. And yet, the threat only made him more determined. He had come too far to turn back. He began connecting symbols with the physical world, plotting routes and addresses on city maps, certain, special. Families had been relocated multiple times, always appearing at key locations during important events, political gatherings, social upheavals, or economic shifts. The ledger had orchestrated their presence for a reason: influence, observation, manipulation. Augustine realized the ledger wasn't just historical, it was alive in its influence, affecting the present without anyone fully aware. Some families still bore its mark, their descendants unknowingly part of a network spanning centuries. He felt a mixture of awe and horror. This was a power no ordinary historian had ever seen, a silent system controlling generations. Late that night, as he traced the final symbols on a map, the room seemed to grow colder. Shadows stretched unnaturally, and Augustine could have sworn he heard whispered footsteps. He froze, heart pounding. His hand hovered over the ledger. Someone, or something, was waiting, watching how far he would go. And yet, Augustine knew one thing. He had to follow the code to its source. If he could uncover the hidden locations, he could finally begin to understand the full scope of the city's secret experiment. Every risk, every threat, every shadow was a piece of the puzzle. He packed the ledger, maps, and notes into a leather satchel, determined to visit the first location at dawn. Elias and Isolde's path would guide him. The symbols promised the next step, and Augustine, for the first time, felt the thrill of a true discovery. Outside, the city slept under the moonlight, unaware that one man carried the key to its darkest secrets. In the shadows, eyes followed him, silent but vigilant. The ledger's history was about to meet the present, and Augustine Darrow was the bridge between them. Augustine begins decoding the ledger's hidden symbols and maps, discovers connections between families, locations, and social manipulation, realizes the ledger predicts outcomes and orchestrates lives, introduces a direct warning from an unknown source, ends with a suspense hook. Augustine is about to visit the first hidden location linked to Elias and Isolde. The first threat. The sun had barely risen when Augustine Darrow set out, the ledger and maps clutched tightly in his satchel. The city streets were quiet, fog curling between brick buildings like restless spirits. Every step felt measured, cautious. He knew that someone, somewhere, was already aware of his investigation. The first location the ledger had marked was near the old docks, a series of abandoned warehouses long forgotten by the city. According to the ledger, Elias and Isolde's lineage had intersected here, their early lives observed and manipulated. Augustine's pulse quickened as he approached the dilapidated structure. Rusted gates creaked as the wind nudged them, and the smell of salt and decay clung to the air. He hesitated at the threshold, heart hammering. Then, summoning courage, he stepped inside. The interior was shadowed and silent, broken beams letting in strips of weak morning light. Dust floated in the air, disturbed only by his careful steps. Augustine spread out the ledger on a flat surface, comparing symbols with the warehouse layout. And then he saw it. Marks on the floor, faint scratches almost erased by time, corresponding precisely to symbols in the ledger. They weren't random. They were instructions, reminders, even warnings left by whoever had first orchestrated the lives of the special families. Augustine's hands shook as he traced them with his fingers. The realization hit him. Generations had moved here, passed through these same spaces, and all of their lives had been subtly controlled. A sudden noise made him jump. Slow, deliberate, echoing through the cavernous warehouse. Augustine froze. He wasn't alone. Whoever had followed him, or was stationed here, was moving closer. He ducked behind a column, chest tight, and held his breath. The footsteps stopped for a moment, then shifted as though circling him. A voice, low and cautious, murmured, "You shouldn't be here." Augustine swallowed hard. His instincts screamed to run, but he knew that fleeing without evidence might mean losing everything. Slowly, he raised a hand, showing he meant no harm. "I'm just researching the ledger," he said, voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I'm not here to destroy anything." A shadow separated from the darkness, revealing a tall figure cloaked in a faded coat. The person's eyes were sharp, calculating, and unyielding. "The ledger is not for outsiders," the figure said. "You don't understand what you're touching. One wrong step, and it could ruin everything, not just your life, but theirs." "The ledger is history," Augustine replied. "It belongs to the truth. I can't ignore it." The figure paused, weighing his words. "Truth," they echoed. "The ledger has power. It guides lives. It chooses who sees it, and now it has